So you need to thread your needle and tie a knot. When you go into your sewing kit, you're going to see that there are two different things. You've got your pins, which have the little balls on the end, which are used to secure your fabric. And then you have your needle, which has the eye where the thread goes through. This is what you're actually going to use to finally secure your fabric. So think about this one's kind of like tape and this one's kind of like glue. This one is just temporary. This one is permanent. So when you go to thread your needle, the first thing you need is thread. And when you go into your box, your sewing kit, you're going to see there's lots of different colors that you can choose from. Pick whichever one you want. When you go to, let me pick a nice bright color so that way you can see. When you go to take out your thread, you're going to notice there are these little sort of slits on the spool of thread. Those are there to kind of park the end of your thread. And it's really important that anytime you're done with your thread that you park it in there so that way they don't get all tangled up. So to take out your thread, how much thread do you need? I'm standing up at my table. I'm going to take the end of my thread in my hand. I'm going to hold it up over my head and I'm going to drop it. And I'm going to let it hit the table. Not the floor, you don't need that much, but I have my arm up over my head, my spool of thread hit the table. If you don't know if this is enough, if you hold it out like this, it's kind of like you're going to do a bow and arrow, right? This is plenty of thread. You can always get more, so it's not that big of a deal, but you want a piece that's long enough that you don't have to continuously get more and more and more, right? So now I have my piece of thread and I need to thread my needle. And this part can get a little bit tricky because we're using this embroidery floss, which when you look at the end of it, you'll see that it's actually a lot of different strands of thread that are braided together to make a thicker strand of thread. So with that being said, this is much easier to sew with and tie a knot with, but it's a little trickier to actually thread on your needle. So in order to do that, what you need to do is you need to take the end of your thread in between your fingers and get all the way up to the very, very, very end. You're literally pinching all of those strands in between your fingers. And then once you have done that, you should be able to just push them all through the eye of your needle, just like this. If things start to come unraveled like this one does, just use your fingers and twist it up. Or if you're really struggling with one end of your thread trying to get it through, try the other end. But really what you need to do is just push them together, squish them together, and slide them through the eye of your needle. You can also, if you want to, just put the end of it really quickly in your mouth and your saliva will seal it, but maybe don't do that. It's a little bit germy. But if you're desperate, go ahead. So now I have my needle on my thread, and now we need to tie a knot. So for tying a knot, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put one end of my thread in this hand and one end of my thread in this hand. I'm going to bring them together and I'm going to line them up so they're about the same. My needle's kind of hanging here loose, so if that's bothering you, you could slide it down. So that way now you've got your two ends of your thread in your hand, your needle's on the bottom, and you could try to hypnotize somebody and say, you are getting very sleepy, right? So my thread is doubled over. I have both ends in my hand. Now I need to tie my knot. Now, this thread is much easier to tie a knot with because it's nice and thick. So let's talk through how we do this. Ready? I have both ends in my fingers, pinch between my thumb and my pointer finger. And to tie the knot, what I'll do is I'll take these two ends and I'm going to loosely wrap it around my pointer finger. And notice I just tucked it right there in between my fingers just to hold it still. So if I look at it from the side, it kind of looks like I've got a letter P there, right? With two little hairs sticking up on top. So I made my loop and now I need to push these two tails through my loop. So I'm going to slide it off my finger. That's why I did it loosely. If you do it really tight, it's stuck on there. And I can see my loop. I'm going to use my finger to push through the loop, and then when I gently pull, I have a knot. Notice, you don't want your knot to be down here in the middle of your thread. You want it to be up here on the very end of your thread. This should be big enough, but in the event that it's not big enough and it pulls through while you're sewing, just double it. So same process, I'm going to hold it in my finger, loop it around, tuck it in between, push those through the loop, and pull. Ooh. They didn't land on top of each other. I'm going to try that one more time. Sometimes that happens. It's not the end of the world. But when you pull, you want your new knot to land on top of your old knot. So now I've got my knot on my thread, I have my needle on the end, and I am all ready to sew.